In my last two Summarized Baby episodes, I used footage from games, so I bought the Bible game. It was bad. The Bible is the best-selling book of all time. When the Harry Potter books were adapted to film, they made bank. If a Bible movie was made, it would make even more money. So why has no one done this yet? This guy's named God. He'll be important later, so remember him. He got bored of no one having a cult centered around him, so he created Earth, and also a bunch of other shit, but no one really cares. It took him 6 days, which is kind of a long time for someone with omnipotent power. When in creative mode, I can build an entire Minecraft world in 6 hours, so why does it take this guy 6 days? Then he fucks off for one day binging Netflix, that lazy slacker. He creates this couple named Adam and Eve. Adam just means man in Hebrew. Imagine if a story about the first couple was created now and it had a man named Guy. Remember that Eve's name is in fact not Steve. I don't know why though. A story about a gay couple being the only two people on Earth is much more interesting than this shit. Some people think that before God created Eve, he told Adam to just start fucking animals until one of them had a kid. I couldn't come up with a joke about this better than just saying it. Then God was like, you see that fruit on that tree? Yeah. You're not allowed to eat it. Then why'd you make it? It's a trust exercise. Couldn't we just do trust falls? Trust balls haven't been invented that. How the fuck did you? They don't eat that fruit, right? This guy's named Satan. He's basically the villain of the Bible. The Bible is a pretty formulaic story. God tells some guy to do something, Satan tries to intervene, and God either succeeds or fails at what he's trying to do. Here Satan turns himself into a snake, and when he gets a break from Adam trying to bang him, he tells Eve to get Adam to eat the fruit so he can be punished. But God decided that he wouldn't tell Eve because sexism, I guess. Sexism is a common theme throughout the Bible. So she's just like, Adam decides to do the dumb thing that Eve wants to do, the fucking simp. Eating the fruit makes them feel shame. Are we sure this is fruit and not a burger? God gets pissed and just kicks them out into the desert. Adam and Eve have 2 sons, who both decide to give shit to God. This really doesn't make any sense. God can just make anything out of thin air. Why would he want livestock and grain? Also, he doesn't have to eat, so why would he even fabricate food out of thin air anyway? Is it the gesture? If it is, seems like a waste of resources. It is these logical pitfalls that I believe explain why your grandparents give you shitty gifts you don't want or need, like rocks and amethyst trees. One son gave God his thickest animal, while the other son gave God only some of his crops. This also doesn't make any sense. Sure, I'd understand not wanting to be skimped, but what would be the equivalent of fat animals for crops? God likes the thick sheep better, because even though he isn't going to use either, it's the thought that counts. The son that gave God wheat, named Cain, decides to kill his brother, named Abed. Good Christian fun. God decides to just tell Cain to fuck off. God doesn't like that there are things, I guess. He decides that it's just a better idea to start over. But he's too lazy to make everything again, so he makes some guy named Noah do it for him. I can't just invent anteaters again. Just make a fucking boat. A boat is not an anteater. People like to live by Bible quotes. Personally, this is my favorite one to live by. God decided that the most effective form of genocide is climate change. He tells Noah to just fill his boat with a bunch of animals and his family. To repopulate Earth, all the humans and animals need to fuck their siblings. Now I understand why this area is called the Bible Belt. Some guy named Abraham is chilling when God decides he's going to make Abraham's kids do a bunch of cool shit. Abraham is just like, I don't have kids and my wife is real old, but alright, let's do this. So God gives him some investment advice and he gets a lot of money. Because of that prophecy, Abraham's wife tries to get him to bang some random maid that works for her. Good Christian fun. So that happens, and then she has a child. God decides not to blame Abraham, but instead blame the maid, because boys will be boys, I guess. The only thing that Abraham is punished with is that he has to have part of his dick cut off. So God decides he's going to fuck up some cities. Abraham tries to get him to not do that, because killing people is bad. And God is just like, I fucking drowned the entire population of Earth except for one family. Do you think I care? He decides, okay, if you can find one person who isn't bad, I'll save the cities. This seems very easy, but the one good person they find is gay, so let's fucking burn the cities. Homophobia is a common theme throughout the Bible. Abraham's wife Sarah has a son, and as a practical joke, God tells Abraham to kill his son. Good Christian fun. Abraham is just like, well, the laws of biology were fundamentally changed so that my elderly wife can have this child. Might as well waste him by killing him on the top of a mountain. So when he gets up to the top of the mountain, God is just like, what the fuck? You actually were going to do it? You were willing to sacrifice your own child so that I can be happy. I don't even get anything out of you killing him. I just wanted to see what would happen. Abraham's son has a son named Jacob. He goes to his uncle and then marries his cousin, which I would make a joke about if the Bible wasn't an incestuous mess already. There are Bible family trees, and all of them are shaped like braids. They also claim that people live for hundreds of years, but that's neither here nor there. They have 12 children, none of which die of incest-related diseases. One son, named Joseph, is way more popular than everyone else, so they just decide to fake his death. Sell him into slavery. Slavery is a common theme throughout the Bible. Joseph tricks everyone in Egypt into liking him, so he becomes the head of the USDA. There's a famine, so all of Jacob's sons show up to Joseph. He then tells them to live with him in Egypt. When Joseph dies, he tells his brothers and their descendants to live in Israel, because that's the country that sounds closest to Jacob's nickname. The gang is being imprisoned by the Egyptians. This guy, named Moses, decides that it'd be a good idea to tell Pharaoh to fuck off. I have two issues here. One, ancient Egypt was a dictatorship. If some random North Korean dude told Kim Jong-un to let them leave, their entire family would be imprisoned. Of course, in this scenario, that's already happening, but it's still probably a dumb idea. Two, this is called an article. Bible only refers to the pharaoh as pharaoh. Pharaoh is a political office, not a name. Of course, in 4,000 years, we will refer to Trump as president, not for this reason, but because of an elaborate historical misinformation campaign. Of course, Moses' plan doesn't work, so Moses decides to extort the pharaoh by summoning locusts and killing firstborn children. Killing civilian children and destroying crops are both war crimes. Moses was a war criminal, and that works for some reason. I guess the pharaoh changed his mind, though, and chases Moses and company. To escape, Moses drank all of this water and then just left. Then everyone fucks around in the desert for 40 years. This takes up the next 4 books. The Bible has some real pacing issues. Imagine if the first 6 Harry Potter books all happened in one book, and then the next 6 books were just Harry, Ron, and Hermione fucking around in the woods. While they're fucking around in the desert, a bunch of people decide to worship some giant golden cow. They still didn't do as much cow worship as Adam. So Moses decides to ask God to make a list of things God doesn't want people doing. God doesn't want you doing some things. So today we're going to be talking about the things God doesn't want you doing. This is WatchMoses.com, and today we'll be counting down the top 10 commands from God. Number 10, worship your parents. Number 9, don't worship things that aren't God. Number 8, don't steal shit. Number 7, don't kill people. Number 6, don't make jokes about God's name. Number 5, don't lie in court. Number 4, don't bang people if you told someone else that you're not going to do that. Number 3, don't do fun shit on Saturdays. Or Sundays, later, when we retcon this. Number 2, God means God. And now for the honorable mentions. Don't eat shellfish, and don't wear clothes made from 2 different fabrics. Number 1, don't want to bang your neighbor's wife. This book is bad. It basically tells you, hey, don't do any of these things or we'll just kill you. It reminds me of the jail scene from Parks and Rec.
You shout like that, they put you in jail right away. No trial, no nothing. Journalists, we have a special jail for journalists. You're stealing, right to jail. You're playing music too loud, right to jail, right away. You're driving too fast, jail. Slow, jail. You're charging too high prices for sweaters, glasses, you right to jail. You undercook fish, believe it or not, jail. You overcook chicken, also jail. Undercook, overcook. You make an appointment with the dentist and you don't show up, believe it or not, jail, right away. We have the best patients in the world because of jail.
Some people go to the promised land and find out that literally 2 people that are currently alive will be in the promised land during their own lifetime. Really fucked up a lot of the kids. Moses tells everyone that they're just going to kill everyone that already lives in the promised land. This book is very popular in the United States, and now I see why. Moses tells everyone that God loves and protects oppressed people, except for all of these groups, according to what we've already learned. And so begins the theme of just calling books names. I'm expecting the next addition to the award-winning Bible series to be called Adolf. Moses dies, so God asks one of the people who will see the promised land, named Joshua, to be in charge now. They go to some city and fuck shit up. Fucking up cities is a common theme throughout the Bible. Everyone in the city dies except one person. Joshua is also a war criminal. So Joshua goes and fucks up another city, this one named Ai. In a later battle, Joshua helps by having God make the sun stay in place. Good job pretending you helped Josh. It's like he knows he's about an actual battle, so he just doesn't do anything, and then retroactively decides, hey, I had God keep the sun in place. Which obviously didn't happen, because why would that help? And also, everyone would be able to be like, yeah, that didn't happen. So, they fuck up yet another city, and for now, I swear they aren't going to fuck up any more cities. Not because they took all the territory that they wanted, but because there aren't any cities left to fuck up. God forbids everyone from banging the locals, who, remember, should all be dead. This is important because the 10 Commandments don't forbid necrophilia. There's a bit where there's a gang rape, where they rape a woman to death, and then cut her up into 12 pieces and give 1 piece each to a different family. This is the only reason I brought this book up, to ensure demonetization. This is Samuel. His adopted father was murdered. God lets him pick a king of Israel. Some guy named Saul shows up to ask a question, and he's just like, you're king now. Saul disobeys God by doing a sacrifice without a priest. Oh no! Leviticus is full of shit. Samuel decides to make some kid named David king. Attackers have some big dude try to fuck shit up. And who is it? It's the mountain. David eats a rock at him and he dies. Saul sends David to go kill 100 people, cut their foreskins off, and give him the severed dick bits. I don't know what he was going to do with them. Saul chases David into the desert, and he dies. He gets stabbed with his own sword, which you'd have to be a fucking idiot to do. David becomes king. He sees a woman naked, so naturally he decides to get her pregnant and send her husband to die in a war. In that order. They have a son named Solomon. He'll be important later. One of David's sons rapes his half-sister. David doesn't do anything. But then David's other sons decide to kill their brother because he raped their sister. Good Christian fun. David is on his deathbed, so his son decides that he's king now. But David decides Solomon should be king. What to do? To be honest, sometimes the Bible reads like a soap opera. Oh, by the way, the answer to that question is murder. The Ten Commandments are just like the Geneva Convention. They're more of a suggestion than an actual set of rules. Solomon owns a lot of land, and then he loses it all except for a little bit. Then he dies. Then goes a long list of kings, most of which no one cares about, but all of which did fucked up shit. Then everyone gets deported. Then Everyone Gets Deported is the best-selling Jewish history book on the market. Job has it all. Then Satan tries a practical joke. He asks God to see if he would still be into God if bad shit started happening to him. So they kill all of his kids. Killing someone's kids is generally a bad way to get them to stay in your cult, but okay. Then he gets herpes. His wife comforts him instead of worrying about if she has herpes. He does anti-God things, but then decides that God is lit, and then gets into God and gets all his stuff back. God still killed a bunch of kids to win a bet. This is just songs. This would be like if you bought a DVD box set for a movie series, and one of the DVDs in it was just the soundtrack. Proverbs is just 2-line poems that just tell you shit. They're essentially Bronze Age life hacks. They give you way too little information to be useful, are very short, and none of them will actually help you. This book is essentially the high ramblings of some guy called the Teacher. Evidence of this is that the book has what is reportedly the best grilled cheese recipe possible. I think that in the Old Testament, they just started parodying shit, like how I parody things like medicine ads, documentaries, and little kids' alphabet videos. But, like, religious somehow. Each of the following books are supposedly written by the person who's in the title. We don't really have any evidence that this is the case. I think the apostles were YouTubers. So the book begins with the author explaining how this bastard, who's called Jesus, is descended from Abraham. Kinda obvious there. Abraham's family kinda killed everyone else. God gets bored of there being only one cult centered around him, so God knocks up Mary, one of the 5 women in the Bible who has a name, and as opposed to Greek mythology, where this is just par for the course, Mary tries to cover up that she had sex by saying God magically impregnated her. At the time, sex ed wasn't a thing, so everyone's just like, it makes sense. So her husband Joseph, who I wish had a different name so it made getting art of the earlier Joseph easier, decides that Mary has to give birth in a different town for some reason. The Holiday Inn is filled, and as opposed to going to the Days Inn across the street, Mary decides to give birth in the parking lot. The king is pissed because Jesus has prophecies about him, I guess, so he decides to kill all the children. Great idea. That won't hurt your economy in 20-ish years. Some guy named John the Baptist starts an induction ceremony where he dunks babies in water. He's a pedophile and has a fetish for babies in swimsuits. Why do you think he never wears pants? Jesus decides he wants to be dunked in water despite being a grown-ass man. John decides to dunk Jesus so no one notices his ulterior motives. Satan tries to mess with Jesus by sending him into the desert for 40 days without food or water. Isn't waterboarding an option? Jesus survives by eating Satan. Jesus and his friends Pete, Andy, Jim, and Jack go around curing people of leprosy and blessing poor people. I'm telling you this to prove that Jesus supported free public health care. Jesus gets his 12 friends, who included those people, Matthew, 3 people no one cares about, Mark, Luke, Paul, and Judas. You can tell who the bad guy is based off of who doesn't get kids named after him anymore. Some people are annoyed with the fact that Jesus is associated with sinners and prostitutes. This is cool because it proves that prostitutes aren't sinners. They also call him an alcoholic, but to be fair, no sober person has ever said, "This wine is my blood." Jesus builds a church. Jesus is eating dinner with his entourage, all sitting on the same side of the table like crazy people, when he reveals that Judas will betray him. Oh wow, Judas called the cops on Jesus. Should have seen this coming, buddy. Historical context time! The Romans had this thing called Interpretatio Romana, which is exactly what it sounds like. The Romans would, when they conquered places, decide that the gods of that place were just the same as the Roman gods. So Poseidon, badass god of the sea, became Neptune, who's the exact same god but with a less cool name because we associate him with a planet. Because of the Bible's whole don't worship things that aren't God thing, the Bible inherently clashed with Interpretatio Romana. So the Romans didn't really like Jesus for spreading that.
So I already discussed the next part of the story in a past video from about 2 years ago.
So I'm just going to show you that clip because I'm too lazy to edit this new thing.
So then the Romans took Jesus and impaled him to a cross. People were morons in 30 CE, so they thought he was dead and threw him in a cave. Jesus chilled in the cave until Sunday when he was like,
I gotta watch last night's SNL.
Surface of the cave was crappy, so he went outside and watched the video out there. Then a dude was like, hey, it's Jesus. And his brother was like, I thought you were dead. And then Jesus said, it's just a prank, bro, April Fools. And thus, April Fools was born.
The New Testament is a lot of retellings of the same story, so I'm going to explain the differences. Mark uses the word then a lot, which is something I'm also guilty of, but I wasn't literally chosen by Jesus to tell his story. Matthew ripped off Mark, but told it slightly better. Luke just added a bit about John the Baptist having a similar miraculous birth to Jesus at around the same time, which somehow makes it worse. For some reason, a nearly naked old man dunking babies in a river seems more okay than a nearly naked 20-year-old dunking babies in a river. John repeatedly mentions that Jesus was a real person and not a spirit to make a jab at a religious movement of the time that thought Jesus was a spirit. Acts of the Apostles is the where are they now of Jesus' story. The apostles decide to replace Judas with some guy named Matthias, who proceeds to do nothing. They learn to speak other languages and go places. Where do they go? Paul goes to Antioch and then to Cyprus. Peter goes to prison and then leaves. There's this big argument about whether or not people who want to become Christian need to have their foreskins cut off. They decide they don't because they have enough dick bits from when Saul made David cut a bunch off. Again, what the dick bits were needed for remains unknown. Paul leaves for Macedonia. He goes to prison and then leaves. Paul goes to Greece, goes to prison and then leaves, and then he goes to Rome where he does shit and writes letters. 1st and 2nd Corinthians are titled the way they are as a test. In early Christianity, there was this thing that people did where they would draw half of a fish, and if the other person finished the fish, that meant they were Christian. The Corinthians books are the same way. If someone refers to them as 1 and 2 Corinthians, that means you know they're not Christian. Right? I only mention these books because I want to talk about how terrible of a person Paul was. The New Testament is kind of boring. Of course, the New Testament is much more historically accurate, but narratively it's pretty boring, which makes the video not as interesting. These books are about Paul trying to get priests to not get married, which is a great way to get only asexual priests. Because of statistics, this is a terrible idea, but Paul was probably asexual himself because he said some really fucked up things about women and gay people. That's a great way to not have either demographic sleep with you. In 619 CE, God gets bored of having only 2 cults centered around him, so he made paid DLC called the Qu'ran. Then in 1830, God gets bored of having only 3 cults centered around him, so he made more paid DLC called the Book of Mormon. He made the Book of Mormon more expensive because his microtransactions weren't going too well post-Protestant Reformation. This book is written all in the future tense, but I'm going to write it in the past tense because the apocalypse happened in 1995 when Logan Paul was born. We've been living in the post-apocalypse for 25 years. No one took it seriously because it was April Fool's. Bad things in the Bible tend to happen on April 1st. So John starts tripping balls, so he goes to each of the churches that existed at the time and tells them what's wrong with them, in an exposed video. God has these prisons that have things in them. Jesus is the only person that can open them. Lockpicks didn't exist, so this actually works. So Jesus unlocks 4 of the seals, which unleash the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. War, pestilence, famine, and death, right? No. Death actually isn't one of the 4 horsemen in the Bible. The last one is actually TikTok. The 5th prison has the souls of people who died for the church, so a bunch of crusaders and not much else. Maybe not a great idea to release a bunch of people who died 800 years ago into the society of 1995. When Jesus opened the 6th prison, something vague happens. The final prison is opened, and it just has trumpets that they need to blow. But no one knows how, so they get a trumpet instructor to teach them. They blow all the trumpets by playing Gangsta's Paradise by Coolio. It was the #1 song on the Billboard Top 100 in 1995. No one knows if this song has been released at the time the apocalypse occurred. We don't know much about the 1995 era because it was so long ago. Back then, people recorded data on these things called laserdiscs, which remain undecipherable to this day. As a result, what comes next is probably not correct because it doesn't really make that much sense. God decides to tell someone to eat a scroll. Then 2 people will start preaching in Jerusalem and will be killed 3.5 years later by some weird monster. God will resurrect them and create an earthquake. Then the weather goes to shit. I would make a joke about this being inspired by a dream I had if that wasn't literally the case. A baby is almost eaten by Satan. Satan leaves. Some weird monsters try to convince people to start a cult around them. Jesus and a bunch of people are on a mountain getting really high when Jesus finds out that Rome has fallen, which is payback, I guess, for killing Jesus. Angels start pouring out of people's blood, which really makes me wonder what John was on when Jesus told him that this shit was going to happen. Everyone except Jesus and his cult are dead. Angels tell Jesus that he's going to marry the faithful of God. So much for monogamy. Jesus yeets Satan into the lava at the end. Then 1,000 years later, Satan comes back and loses again. And then everyone lives happily ever after. Except for all the people that died.